So, Joel, if this actually happens, if the HHS under Kennedy does release this report, this will be a huge deal. The company's liability and the public health implications could be enormous. And those who have been warning about acetaminophen's neurotoxic risk for decades will have been vindicated. And the market knows this. The company behind Tylenol now is Kenvue, and it's already feeling the heat. Their stocks have already plunged around 10% upon news of this pending report. So I want to take a little bit of time to go into like, what is it? How often is acetaminophen actually used? And a little bit of how we got here. So how do we come to this realization that there, in fact, most likely is this connection between acetaminophen and autism, and then what we can do about it. All right. So you ready?
I am ready. I'll just say, I'll just affirm what you're saying about the debunking of, well, we just didn't have a good diagnosis years ago. Listen, I'm a lot older than you are. When I was in elementary school, no, nobody even came close to autism. I mean, nobody can, you didn't know anybody. There was nobody in school that was even, I mean, it was not even close. There was no such thing as a kid beating his head against a wall. It did not exist. It simply did not exist. And so, yeah, from day one when the naysayers have said, "Oh, we just didn't know what it was." No, 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 no. That's not true. In 1900, you didn't have kids beating their heads against a wall. It did not exist. And I'm not trying to be, unsympathetic or condescending. I mean, that's just, one of the things that that autism, how it manifests itself. And it just no, it wasn't here. All right. So you're right.
Yes.
Yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's not, and we can get into this as well, but this is part of why we are beyond labels, is because autism is a label. And so I think this is part of the problem, is that, and I am fully sympathetic because my oldest son was on the autism spectrum, and is now fully healed. So I have a lot of experience in this area and researched it a lot and had a lot of time to think about it. And we have labeled this condition as autism. And so it is rising, just like other chronic and autoimmune conditions are rising. And so what I have come to the conclusion is that all of these labels are really stopping us from finding out the root cause. And they all have a similar root cause, in that they are all built upon exposure to toxins. These are diseases that are caused by toxins. And we can get into more of that at the end if you would like. But
Mhm.
as our toxic exposure has increased and continues to increase, we're seeing the climbing rates of all of these conditions. And there's a lot of evidence now to show increased toxicity in children's bodies that have increase in oxidative stress, increase in oxidative damage, free radicals causing this oxidative damage, decreased level of antioxidants and glutathione, which is a master antioxidant in the body. So there's evidence to support what I'm saying here. And again, we can get into that, but let's first talk about, what is it, how often is it used, and how we got to this point.
Right.
So acetaminophen is a fever reducer and a pain reliever. It is one of the most common active ingredients in US medicines and one of the most widely used drugs in the world, especially by pregnant women and children. An estimated 60% of pregnant women use acetaminophen for headaches or other pains or fever. And about 20% of pregnant women use it for over 20 days at a time. Okay, so I'm setting up the picture for you here. If you can imagine, it's saying the majority of women are using acetaminophen during pregnancy, and some of them are using it for at least 20 days at a time. Now, among the US adult population, about 25% of us, or 1 in 4, use an acetaminophen containing medicine every single week. And many of us may not even realize it because it's hidden in different medications. There's more than 600 prescription and over-the-counter medicines that contain acetaminophen. It can hide in cold and flu combos, cough medicine, allergy medicine, sleep aids. So think of Dayquil, NyQuil, Robitussin, like Mucinex Fastmax, Theraflu, Alka-Seltzer Plus cold and sinus, Excedrin, Midol, Benadryl, allergy sinus headaches, Excedrin PM, Sudafed. So the list goes on, but those are some real name brands that you'll find in your local grocery store. All of those contain acetaminophen. So lots of people, that's why this is a big story, Joel. It's beyond just this connection to autism. A lot of people are consuming acetaminophen regularly and they don't even realize it. Okay. So it's actually been around for a long time. Acetaminophen was first synthesized in 1878. And then in the 1950s, it was marketed widely. And Tylenol itself was launched in 1950.
When was that? Did you say 1878?
1878.
1870. I mean, that's like right after the Civil War.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, that's a
I know.
long time ago.
It was a long time ago. Yes. Yeah. But like I said, it wasn't marketed widely until the 1950s. Tylenol was actually launched in 1955, and that was after it received the FDA approval. And again, the preclinical testing was not very thorough. and then in 1960, it became available over the counter. Okay, so by 1960, you don't need a prescription for it. You can just walk to the drugstore and get it over the counter yourself. Now, in the 1980s, there was an autism spike. And around the same time, this was when Tylenol began to be heavily used during pregnancy and infancy. And part of that is because if you remember, in the 1980s, aspirin was being shunned for use in children. And that was because aspirin had been connected to Reye syndrome, which is that rare life-threatening condition that causes swelling in the liver and the brain. So as a response, the CDC was cautioning medical professionals and parents about that link. And the U.S. Surgeon General formally advised against aspirin for children with influenza and chickenpox. Warning labels became mandatory by the FDA in 1986. And the medical community did begin recommending non-aspirin fever and pain reducers like acetaminophen. And that nudged people towards Tylenol. So by the 1980s, Tylenol was the top-selling pain reliever in the United States. And this was when we reportedly started seeing some spikes in autism. Now, again, I want to make it clear that on this show, we are not saying that all autism is caused by acetaminophen. That is not what we're saying. We're saying there's an association here, but there are also other toxins that children and adults are exposed to already by the 1980s. And the number one linked toxin that is associated with autism based on peer-reviewed published studies, peer-reviewed published scientific studies, the number one link to autism is vaccines. It is the toxins that have been allowed in the like mercury, like lead, and other adjuvants. So we could do a whole show on that if people want. I can put some links in the description, but that is the number one associated a trigger. And what we're saying here is that another trigger is possibly acetaminophen, and we'll get into the why in just a moment. Okay. So we see this spike in autism in the 1980s. Now, it wasn't until the early 2000s that some researchers and some practitioners began to theorize that the rise in Tylenol use might, in fact, be contributing to a surge in neurodevelopment problems. Okay, so this was the early 2000s. So now it's almost 25 years later, right? This is still being still an ongoing debate. Not much has been done about it. So by 2008, you have the appearance of the first peer-reviewed paper that was published that suggested this link between early acetaminophen exposure and neuropsychiatric disorders. In this study, the authors were trying to find out if acetaminophen use after children receive the MMR vaccine, that's the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, was that associated with autism? So, Joel, this is a common practice nowadays that you bring your child in or your baby in for vaccines, and they may spike a fever, they may be in pain. And so the advice is to give them Tylenol. And so this study, published in 2008, wanted to see, does that recommendation cause an increased risk of having some kind of neuropsychiatric disorder? Okay. The study found.
And Sina, I've got to just make sure that we're walking our listeners through this and help people to realize that that when the government approves a product, whether it's an herbicide, a pesticide, a vaccine, a Tylenol, when the government approves a product, they never, ever, ever, can I say that again? Ever use it in cocktail form. It's only studied in singularity. And so what you're saying here, I mean, my lights are going off. Okay, yeah. A lot of times you take your child, you get a little baby vaccine and they have a fever. So then you go to Tylenol. But that is not the way any government study is ever. They're never testing it in tandems, in pairings, in cocktails. You could probably make a little jingle off of that. The government doesn't do pairings, like wine and cheese, the government doesn't do pairings. It only does singular. And so we're literally in the dark here as to what following a vaccine with Tylenol does compared to a study that just looks at the vaccine and then just looks at the acetaminophen. Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.